Hi everyone, RogueGold here, and today I have what I think is a pretty interesting discussion I would love to have with you all as we wait for things to pick up here soon with the next phase of the PTS and Ubisoft Forward, all of that jazz. I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about what I feel has got to be one of the most underutilized parts of the game that Massive has today in the Division 2. A part of the game that has not only been incredibly underused up until now, but I feel deserves to have some of this new Year 4 and 5 content that we're getting hosted there. You may have guessed it from the background footage, we're talking about New York City, the lower Manhattan portion of the map that was unlocked to us with the Warlords of New York expansion. Now, to be fair, it's not like there has been absolutely zero usage of this part of the game since the expansion. Technically, it has its own game mode there with the summit, but really you could say that building is actually in, Los Angeles, and nobody would be able to tell you different. They've used New York a few times in the seasonal stuff. I remember some of the Schaefer sub-targets were there where we encountered that hunter. I know one of Faye's sub-targets was there, might have been Cersei. So it's not that it hasn't been used at all, but considering it's technically the, premier content, it's the expansion land, the level 40 playground, the traditional MMORPG or live service game shifts the entire focus of the game to the new zone when an expansion releases, and Division 2 hasn't really done that. And I know there's such a drastic absence of content here because whenever I do come to New York, I feel like I'm rediscovering it all over again because there's no reason to ever come here. I think this is partly a symptom of the greater targeted loot problem, quote unquote, although it's not really a problem. Back when targeted loot was first introduced in TU6, there had never been anything like that. So there was an immense incentive to go and play different areas of the game depending on where things were on the daily rotation out in the open world. And so, in TU8 and TU9 after Warlords released, if SMGs or Fenris was somewhere in New York, you'd bet a lot of people were there. But now that Summit and Countdown exist, open world targeted loot allocation just doesn't hold much value anymore. These days, I usually end up going to play something in DC or New York in the open world in spite of its target rather than because of it. So that's one thing. Targeted loot has lost a lot of its appeal, and without that, the Manhattan map just doesn't offer that much incentive for an endgame player, which is a shame because I think it's absolutely the more compelling map between it and DC by far, in my opinion. And open world viability certainly isn't at its highest game-wide. It's not like there's droves of people grinding out DC's open world, but it does have some well-established material farming routes, a few more open world boss spawns, the snitch, like at least there's a few things going for it, where again, even though I think New York is the superior map, it just doesn't have much incentive. It's got control points, but so does DC, and DCs are closer together. It's got bounties, so does DC. So I suppose my whole point here with this video is that there's nothing wrong with New York, it just needs more, and I think it deserves more. Clearly, I don't think the coming seasons are going to bring us here. Maybe, but it seems like the story is very much focused on DC and the True Sons and their plot and all of that right now. DC is also getting TU16's new content, the new legendary missions. I guess Manning Zoo is technically a separate location, but Tidal Basin is, of course, in DC. So when is New York getting its due? I don't know if it's currently in the cards or not, but I will gladly start the movement to shift some of the focus of the new coming content over to Manhattan. Beyond my own selfish reasoning, I do legitimately think it would be a breath of fresh air for a lot of players who likely haven't spent any considerable amounts of time in New York since completing the Warlords campaign, and I think that's a shame. So, how do we fix it? I have some suggestions. Obviously, the devs have their own plans for what's in the content pipeline for the rest of Year 4 and into Year 5, but I wanted to suggest just a few ways in which they could begin to bring Manhattan back into the fold, because I do think there are a number of ways that they could do it. The first idea I had in mind is a feature that a lot of people have suggested they bring to the game for a very long time now, and that's an open world legendary setting. Whether this would just be its own modifier selector in the open world settings tab, or if they might structure it into its own sort of game mode, I don't know. But if they were to implement this type of experience, why not make it just exclusive to New York? Then if it's a particularly lucrative experience, or there's exclusive nade items or exotics tied to that mode, you'd have a reason to go there. Or, even if it's just another way to farm the Bighorn, having that would mean that New York would finally have an incentive, a reason to go and visit it, something that it offers that nowhere else in the game does. Because currently, it just doesn't have that. And as I said, I think that's a shame given how cool I think the map is. So that's just one of many, many options, having some sort of open world legendary experience with control points and everything set exclusively in Manhattan. Another option, some sort of other new game mode could be housed there. Of course, we know that we're getting a new game mode in Season 11. There's no telling whether it might be like Countdown, where we get a new unique map for it, or if it maybe does use some of the existing areas we already have. Perhaps it'll be set in New York, but regardless, there are at least 5 more major title updates after Season 11 before Year 5 is out. If we end up getting another game mode after Season 11, set it in New York. There are vast amounts of ways in which that could be done, but honestly, if they were to utilize Manhattan's map for it, it may even feel like it is set in a brand new place because of how infrequently I think a lot of people visit NYC in Div 2. And I think there's so many cool locations specifically used during Woni's campaign, like that rooftop satellite fight you do during Parnell's section, I think stuff like that, the multi-tiered construction site you visit before fighting Kajika. There's so many awesome spots that aren't used nearly enough, and so however they might work it in, I think placing some or all of a new game mode in Manhattan would be awesome. Another option, well, I think it's probably pretty unlikely at this point, make a New York Dark Zone. There were a lot of theories back in the day that this was actually in the works. I remember making a video about that myself, but that was back before Star Wars and we lost Red Storm and all that. So current day Div 2, I think it is pretty clear from their motivations and resource availability that they're definitely looking to improve the current PvP experience before adding on to it at all, but that doesn't mean that a new Dark Zone in New York wouldn't still be awesome, because I think it would be. And so, maybe down the line towards the end of Year 5 into Year 6, if we end up getting one, maybe the team has grown enough and they've patched up PvP to the point where making a new DZ makes sense. All I'm saying is the desire is still there for it. Massive. I would personally love to see that. And then on a similar note, but maybe in a slightly more realistic option, is to make a new conflict map based in Manhattan. Although technically making a new DZ is kind of as simple as just making a new map and porting over the existing rule sets, I have to imagine that there's some more complexity in there with making the checkpoint location, setting up the turrets, the safe house design, different landmark spawns, all that stuff. With a new conflict map, you just got to make the zone and import the existing rule sets. Voila. Now, obviously, conflict has not been in a great state, like, ever, but considering the last new map we got was Wharf way back in TU6, it would be kind of nice to see one additional map one of these days, especially if they do end up making some conflict improvements and changes based off of the ETF feedback or just other stuff they may want to do overall. You can't tell me that New York doesn't have tons of spots that would be absolutely awesome for a conflict map. I mean, there's multiple connected rooftops that'd be sick to fight across. There's that underground mall area up by the tombs, the building collapsed, crater and wreckage of the iconic burning building in and around the Brooklyn Bridge somewhere. I mean, the possibilities there are quite vast. Now, among some of these other options, I would imagine that designing and implementing a new conflict map is pretty low on the team's priority list, but that doesn't mean it still wouldn't be a nice touch. So like I said, maybe one day, but Manhattan has ample opportunity for that purpose. And so I guess that's about the extent of the ideas off the top of my head. Guys, clearly there are dozens, hundreds of ways even that they could make the New York map matter more, whether it be through game modes or loot allocation, exclusivity, whatever. My whole point with this video is I think the New York map is just far too well done and too cool to be as underutilized as it currently is. And I think it's so underused that putting any emphasis or new content there would likely be such a big breath of fresh air for the player base because, like I said, I just think visitation there is so limited. Some people go there, I'm sure. I'm not trying to say it's unpopulated at all. I always see people in Haven when I go there, but I just don't think it's focused on nearly enough. Again, especially considering it's technically the endgame-ist of endgame zones being Woni's premium map, so use it, Massive. Use the great work you've already made. Work smarter, not harder. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe with notifications on to be updated every time I upload. Let me know your thoughts about this discussion regarding Warlords of New York's Manhattan map in current day Division 2. Do you think it's underutilized in its current form, or perhaps you think it's perfectly fine as is? And if you were to implement any changes there or introduce some sort of new content, what might that be? As always, I will be very curious to hear all of your thoughts on the matter. I miss New York. That's the simple truth. And I had a lot of fun just running around and getting this background footage for the video, so I can't imagine I'm the only one who thinks there could be more done to make it more relevant. But we'll see. Interested to hear everybody's thoughts. We've got big stuff coming up real soon here, guys, with the next phase of the PTS, Ubisoft Forward, in less than 2 weeks. It's all very exciting, so be sure to stay tuned right here on the channel for all the latest updates. That's going to do it for me today, though, everybody. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and until the next one, guys, RogueGold. Ow.